Hello, everyone. It is 10 a.m. Thank you so much for logging in on time and joining us for today's learning community call. Before I get started, I just wanted to say I want to apologize again for the last minute change in our topic. I had hoped to discuss the Quitline outcomes report that came out at the end of last year. Our guest speaker, Katie Carradine from National Jewish Health, had a last minute emergency that she had to take care of. And so I'll be working with her to reschedule that for the next learning community call instead of this one. But in the meantime, I think this is a really good and really important topic. I think I know it's a personal interest to me, and I know it's of interest to BHWP, which is why I have these slides ready to go. And I assume that it's of specific interest to a lot of you. And I haven't seen our big counties logging in yet, or at least nobody on my screen that I see is. And I hope that's not because when I say rural, they thought that they weren't involved, because a lot of our big counties have rural areas, and all of the things that would help more rural counties that we'll talk about today would impact their communities as well. So with that said, I'm gonna go through some slides. I want to go rapidly through the beginning, but if I go too fast, let me know and we can slow down. I can repeat. I can always provide resources. I just want to go through the beginning really fast because I think it's important to lay the foundation for what comes near the end of the presentation. But the focus, I think, is really on the apps and the Quitline, which is what I really want to talk about. You're welcome to keep your you're welcome to keep your cameras off, at least during the presentation part. You don't have to. I like to see your faces while I'm talking, but if you if you want to turn them off, I totally get it. Especially those of you who are in the new grantee orientation and you're working on your 17th hour of camera time this week. I get it. So by all means, but when we come back to the question and answer session at the end, it would be great if you could turn your cameras on at that point. So I always like to start emphasizing the role of nicotine dependence in the justification for why we need tobacco cessation support. Why do we need evidence-based best practices? And it's because this isn't just a habit. This isn't just a thing that people kind of do all the time and it's kind of problematic. There's a physiological and there's a psychological dependence here at work that makes change hard. Doesn't make change impossible, but it makes change hard, and we can make it a lot easier by providing them the actual supports, the actual evidence-based supports that we know help in this environment. And when I say that it's addictive, when I say that nicotine's addictive, people seem to underplay it or downplay it or ignore it. So I always like to point out that according to Jack Henningfield and Neil Benowitz, who literally wrote the textbook on how nicotine works in the body and how addictive it is, it's the worst one. It's the most dependent causing one. So they were asked to rank 6, and they were asked to rank them in order. And you can see that both of them agreed that nicotine is number 1. It's the absolutely most addictive substance of the 6 that they were asked to rank. And so, okay, that's biology, that's neurochemistry, whatever, maybe has a different public health impact. But if we look at it in terms of the way that public health professionals would look at it, this is a book by Kleiman et al. They measure dependency on 3 different factors. So capture rate is how many people who use the substance go on to become dependent on it. Chronicity is how frequently does a dependent user use it, like how many times per day. And if somebody tries to quit, how likely are they to relapse to? And you can see in all 3 measures, nicotine ranks number 1. Now, they weren't, you can see that it ties. This particular ranking system allowed for ties. And chronicity and relapse, it tied with heroin, right? Which is sort of famous for being really dependence causing. And so I do like to always start there. And then when we look at our numbers a little bit more specifically, numbers range based off of the criteria used to define dependence. But I'd like to point out that even if that top bullet point was the actual number, if we could separate out operationalization and all this kinds of scientific mumbo jumbo out of the equation and just say that in real life, 50% of individuals who use nicotine would go on to become dependent to it, it would still be number 1. But the numbers actually go up from there, right? And so I can sort of go through this whole list, but I did this before for the justice-focused tobacco cessation. So if you want to see a bigger exploration of these numbers, go there. I just want to highlight the orange one, which is highlighted, conveniently, where 85% of daily smokers meet DSM-5 criteria. And I point that out. I like to highlight this one because this is the newest study in the list here. And it's the only one, to my knowledge, that uses the DSM-5 criteria. The others are using DSM-4 or DSM-3 criteria. So it's just older and more stringent definitions for what meets dependence. And when we use the DSM-5 criteria, it's 85% of daily users, and that's a lot. And so really, when you're in public health and you're working in tobacco control, you need to understand that you're working in a substance use context, and you're not, so the resource that you need to provide needs to match what resources we're providing in our offices of behavioral health and our substance use programming, which is to say evidence-based psychological and medical interventions, not simply education, awareness raising, although those things remain important. And so that's what this says, right? So this list of why dependence matters in a public health context was put together in 2006. I really like it, and specifically the second bullet point, which is what I just said. So those are these two themes. Sorry, I just went over theme number one here. Theme number two is that most tobacco users want to quit. In Colorado, that number fluctuates between, I shouldn't say fluctuates, it's right around 65%. And that's true statewide, and that's true in almost every county in the state. Most tobacco users want to quit. And we know that, by the way, that's true of even our youth users, over 50% of which tried to quit ends in the previous year from the one they were surveyed in. So again, most tobacco users, even when those users are young, and even when those users are using a theoretically or potentially safer, less risky device, the incentive to quit is still very high. The motivation to quit is still very high. And because they want to quit, and because nicotine is so very dangerous, we have an ethical obligation to make sure that they get the proper supports. And proper supports, I repeat on this line, means what's proper for them, right? Everybody, and cessation is possible for anyone as long as they get the level and type of support that they specifically need, right? And so I said that the quitting is hard, but it isn't impossible. It's absolutely possible. And when I say proper supports, primarily what we're talking about here are evidence-based supports. Some people want other kinds of things. When I say what's proper for them, it's not what they want. Well, some people want weird things, and that's fine. We just know that those don't necessarily quote unquote work from a scientific perspective. So we also want to, if we want to give them mint chewing gum because they think that's really going to be helpful, great. But they also need maybe coaching, counseling, and pharmacotherapy. So when we say evidence-based, this is primarily what we're talking about, is that it really is about counseling and medications, and then it's tailored for different age groups, different racial or ethnic categories, different poverty levels, different educational levels, different literacy levels, that is tailored for the person that you're delivering it to. And for those who are not ready to quit, which I say that 65% of Coloradans want to quit. They say that they want to quit within the next year. How many want to quit today? Very low number. So can we move people from I want to quit next year to I want to quit in the next 6 months? Move that from I want to quit in the next 3 months. I want to quit in the next couple of weeks. I want to quit today. And so for them, we need motivational types of supports. And sometimes that goes back to our awareness raising campaigns, right? Sometimes people would be more ready to quit if they knew they had evidence-based support. When we say evidence-based supports, we are primarily talking about these things. So when I say we want to build evidence-based tobacco cessation services in rural areas, these are the things that people need access to. Now, of course, we don't just throw people into these things. We screen them, make sure we're not putting everybody into a tobacco cessation group, just smokers or just tobacco users. And we're not giving everybody one-on-one counseling, just the ones who assess at that level of dependence that would necessitate it, or their preference. And of course, we're always making sure that people are going into these environments educated about what they have access to, how those things work, and why they would want to use those things. And of course, we're wrapping all this stuff in the 5 A's, using the assess and assist phases to determine which of the evidence-based supports they need, and then making sure our health systems are designed in a way that there's continuity of care. So people they leave one area to go get care, different kind of care from someplace else, but all the providers involved, know what the others are doing and what that patient's progress looks like. So very briefly on the rural component in particular, this is what our prevalence rates look like when we divide up between different levels of rurality or urbanity. There are a lot of different ways to do this. You can really just say like rural versus urban. That's not a particularly good one. I've seen 7 and 9 levels of urbanity and rurality. This one is 5, and I feel like that's probably good enough. And it also makes it, you can still pull some meaning out of something like this. So what you'll see here is in the sort of the darkest blue, and then the next phase up, those are our 2 metro sizes, big cities and sort of regular like middle-sized cities. The black line is the average of the next 3 bars. That's just, if you were to say like, if it's either small metro, large metro, or rural, that black bar is your rural number. And then there's 3 levels of rurality, or 3 levels of rurality there. And so you'll see urbanized, rural, and that tends to mean like it's a fairly sparsely populated county, but it has 3 or 4 larger towns in it, kind of. And then less urbanized is those towns are getting a little bit further apart from each other. This is really a shortcut on how to think about these levels. And then completely rural is exactly what it sounds like. Very low numbers of people per square mile. And what you can see here is that across the board, our collective rural bar is the highest one in all but one case. And that is with the smokeless, where completely rural is really driving that average. And then outside of that, if you want to look at just the rural areas, those 3 levels of rurality, it's that middle level. It's the less urbanized rural counties where the numbers are typically the highest. And there's first of all, that's interesting because we tend to think of rurality as a spectrum where the more densely populated big cities have the lowest prevalence rates, and then you just think about it as a straight line going to the most rural areas having the highest prevalence rates, and that simply isn't the case. A lot of tobacco use is socially driven, and if you don't have if a lot of your friend networks don't smoke, then also you won't. And so there's actually a sort of a virtuous cycle that can come across from just not running into that many people all the time in those sort of vice-centered areas. The big exceptions here, like I said, is smokeless, and then you can also see a little bump in ends, right? So we tend to think of ends as a primarily urban and almost affluent pattern, but we actually see in electronic nicotine products, by the way, those ENPs is that final set of bars. So pretty low use. By the way, these are adult numbers, and that's why you see 4.2% there. You can see that less urbanized is just a slightly bit higher there. The dotted line is the average across all 5 levels of rurality, and so you can see that it really is the fact that the large metro areas are really outperforming all the other categories in terms of just the base average. If nicotine use or tobacco use were harmless, we wouldn't have a gigantic public health machine trying to control that use, right? You can sort of think of this and kind of compare this to like the use of caffeine. There are some people who are concerned about caffeine, and I think that generally more people should be more concerned about it than they are, especially caffeine use in the high schools, which is getting higher and higher all the time. But in general, there are no offices of caffeine control. There are no massive federal policies for caffeine control. Quite the opposite, really. I mean, we almost have incentives and subsidies for caffeine growers, and there's an esteem and a social cachet for using caffeine and getting your Starbucks cup and all that kind of stuff. Tobacco, of course, doesn't have that, and there's a big difference between tobacco use and caffeine, and that is this slide. That tobacco use causes or is associated with all of America's, I say top 10 here, but it's really top 12 or 13. You notice I don't have COVID on this chart. In an updated version of this graph, I do have COVID. And we have at least solid evidence that tobacco use aggravates the progression of that disease. And of course, the comorbidities, having comorbidities and getting COVID increases your chances of dying from COVID. And tobacco use causes most of those comorbidities. You'll also see unintentional injuries. If you were present during the new grantee orientation, you would see a different chart that says that tobacco use isn't associated with unintentional injuries. And that's the official CDC line. And I more or less accept it. But I don't, just because the role of tobacco in unintentional fatalities is extremely low, I don't want to, it's not zero. It is the number one cause of accidental house fires in the country. It's associated with a non-zero amount of automobile accidents. And of course, we all know about the very infrequent and rare fatalities associated with e-cigarettes exploding and with ingestion of e-juice, especially among very, very, very small children. So it's not zero, and I think we should appreciate that it's there. Susan, you have your hand up?
Yes, I have a question. So it sounds like you're saying tobacco interchangeably with, even though the slide says smoking. And I just wanted to be clear on, can we say that? So that's kind of my first part of the question. And the second is just really, like, can we also say the same about just nicotine products in general? Because I know, like with Zen and some of these other products, kind of being compared to like, well, it's like caffeine, it's a stimulant. And so I appreciate that you're talking a lot about nicotine too, but I just want to get clear on this slide, like, is it smoking?
Wonderful question. Thank you so much. Yeah, absolutely. This is it. This is so. I don't mind myself using interchangeably tobacco use and smoking, because 85% of all tobacco use in the country is smoking, right? And or it's smoking and other things. So it's either single use or dual use smoking first. This is a smoking statistic. So whenever you see 483,000 deaths per year, that is the CDC's smoking deaths. And not even just smoking, that is their cigarette death. That does include cigars and pipes, hookah, other things that you would smoke. And it doesn't include smokeless deaths at all, even though that is tobacco that has been cured typically through exposure to smoke, or sometimes through exposure to smoke. So yes, primarily smoking. When I talk about dependence, I am talking about nicotine dependence. And so any damage statistics that you've seen, those are almost always smoking, because that's all we have statistics for, unless I call out smokeless in particular, which I don't in this presentation. But thank you, good clarification. And yeah, you know, if we one of these days, I'm probably going to return to youth cessation as a topic, and there I'll be talking specifically about the known damages caused by nicotine in periods of rapid development. So in infancy, well, in utero, in infancy, and in adolescence. Because those are also not zero. They're just, they're not fatalities, but they are dysfunction. So the consequence of tobacco use rates at their current levels are some of these statistics that are on this. I mean, these statistics, but there are others that are not on the slide. So you see that 90% greater risk of developing heart failure, 34%, that number is 34% among rural Black Americans. Rural Americans have a 16% greater risk of developing type 2 diabetes and higher prevalence of COPD. All of those things, of course, caused by smoking. Now, also caused by other things, but also caused by smoking. In general, we see a higher excess mortality. So when we're saying excess mortality here, this is sort of with your tobacco use and other life issues controlled for. We still see higher mortality than we would expect given these other health behavior inputs. And you'll see that specifically in cancer, with lower incidence of cancer and higher mortality, which is all to say that our health behaviors don't reside in a vacuum. They don't begin or end inside of our bodies. What causes us to choose or to perform unhealthy behaviors is influenced by our friends and our family and our cultures, and our health and our ability to survive longer with the habits that we have is dependent on our health systems, right, that we are associated with, and our nutritional access and all these other things. And so if we want to see if we want to even out the current disparities between rural and urban outcomes, we actually need to drive tobacco use lower than it is in their urban counterparts, or I should say, we need to make our health systems in our rural areas more robust, and in this particular instance, more robust to tobacco treatment. So how can we do that? So I'm not going to go into a lot of depth in the first three. First of all, they're not huge areas of expertise for me, but these first three things are really, how do we attract primarily doctors into rural areas. Now, this can be applied to other healthcare providers and is and should be, but most of the research on how these things work and what they should look like have been developed for trying to get MDs to move to relocate to locate or relocate into rural areas. And I'm not saying that these don't work, and I'm not saying that they do work. I'm just saying these are three ideas that people have, right? Is just, can we get more doctors here? Can we get more psychologists here? Can we get more healthcare workers, social workers, nurses here? And how can we do that? Well, we can just pay them, or we can just talk about our areas a little differently, or we can literally just pay for our own high school graduates to go to college and hope they come back with the skills that we need. Those are the sort of the top three areas. Those are all extremely expensive. They're extremely time consuming, and you wouldn't see the impact of them for, if you started today, at least 7 or 8 years from now. That's not, I'm not ignoring them. I don't think that they're unimportant. And I think that we should do what we're doing here, even more than we're currently doing it. I just want to concentrate on the bottom three. When we say identify and train up existing neighbors, what we are primarily talking about here, this is the health neighborhood work. Understanding that of those things that I listed that were evidence-based things, evidence-based tobacco cessation services, some of them have to be performed by professionals. And the best way to do that is to kind of look at these top three bullet points on this slide. You're just going to need more psychologists. You're going to need more addictions counselors. You're going to need more MDs and DOs and nurse practitioners. That's just sort of the bottom line. But there's a lot of things on that list that you don't need an advanced degree for. You don't need an advanced degree to run most tobacco cessation groups. You don't need an advanced degree to refer people to the quit line. You don't need an advanced degree to be a conduit of evidence-based pharmacotherapies, right? So where are people going? Where are your tobacco users going in the community? And when they're engaging with those professionals or with those systems, can we get any tobacco cessation services in those systems, right? That's what we mean by identifying and training up existing neighbors. And the great thing about them is you don't have to persuade them to live there. They already live there, right? So this is a really cheap option. It's not free, but it is inexpensive in the sense that since they're already there, all they need is education, and you guys have that education. The things I'm going to talk, so I have other modules, other presentations on the health neighborhood. So I want to focus now on the telephonic care, the Colorado Quit Line, and the use of apps. Doing great on time, doing fantastic. I hope everybody's finding this deeply interesting. So good, thank you for the thumbs up. If you're interested in this topic and you're here, so I assume you are, you can go onto our website, which is B as in boy, bhwellness.org, bhwellness.org. You can get this report if you'd like. It's not overly complicated. It's not overly long. My colleague Derek Nolan and a couple other staffers here went out to, now this was rural New Mexico, so I apologize, but that's where National Jewish wanted to send us. So National Jewish Health funded this research project, and it was done here at BHWP. We went out into the field in New Mexico, and I think it was New Mexico. It could have been Nevada. I'm pretty sure it's New Mexico. I should have read the report before I started talking about it. I normally have Derek do this part since he wrote the thing. At any rate, and we just simply asked callers from rural New Mexico what they thought about the quit line, how successful was it for them, all the things that you want to know on whether or not the quit line is appropriate for rural denizens of the rural Southwest. And the answer is yeah. Over 51%, over half, 51% made it to 4 or 5 calls. And of several of them that didn't make it to 4 or 5 calls, the reason they didn't make it to 4 or 5 calls is because they were quit before they got that far, right? So it says, I don't know why this bullet was written this way, 56% had used tobacco in the last 30 days, which is to say that 44% had not, which is definitely what that slide should say. 44% success rates after, say, 3, 4, 5 calls is more or less in line with our Colorado numbers, which you will see when we get Katie back, right? 44% quit rates is extremely high. If you're new to tobacco cessation work, that may not sound very high. You're like, 44%, really? That's it? We're used to like pills, like solving and curing disease or treating or controlling it. But in our world, when we see a success rate of 12 or 13 or 14% coming out of any given intervention, that would be very good. And so to see 44%, I mean, that's really off the charts. Yes, Michelle, I agree. This is very cool. And when we talk now, keep in mind, these are callers to the quit line. So these are people with experience with the actual services that the quit line provides. I've now lost all of your beautiful faces. I'm trying to get them back. I don't know if I will. Oh, well, they're there. Most of them were extremely pleased with the level and quality of care that they got through there. There's always this assumption that, you know, the quit line isn't right for this person or that person, or it's not going to play here because we're too whatever parochial or value centered or whatever the rationales are. But the fact is that the people who actually call the quit line come away with a very positive impression of it. And now in New Mexico, the number one thing that people really liked from their quit line was the free medications. In our Colorado survey, our Colorado reports, that was tended to be second or third down on people's lists. And there could be other reasons for that. Like maybe we have better Medicaid options for pharmacotherapy. So it was less important here that they got it from the quit line. I don't know. Data's data. We have to come up with stories to explain the data. And I don't know that story yet. At any rate, this is what our survey said. And then when we asked, what we asked them was, you know, if you were to recommend the quit line to your friends or family that use tobacco, would they use the quit line or not? And if not, why not? That's not exactly the wording of the question that we used, but you can sort of see that was the gist of the analysis here. And the number one reason that people would call the quit line was not because it doesn't work here or it won't work for, you know, my people or whatever. The number one reason they thought people, their friends or family wouldn't call the quit line right now is because they're not ready to quit right now. So this gives us a nice public health, if they're right, this gives us a nice public health initiative, right? We have to figure out ways to motivate people to call it. and this is by far, I mean, 86% is almost double the next one down on the line, which is still a pretty big number. And that is, they don't think the quit line will help them. So this is another good call to action for public health. If we need to communicate to the quit line, if we need to communicate for the quit line or about the quit line, what do we need to communicate? And that is its efficacy. We need to get that 44% figure out there and say, like, if you complete the calls, if you get access to the medications, there's a good chance that for free in a matter of 6 to 8 weeks, you may be done with this nightmare that you've been living with for the last several years, right? It's not going to work for everybody. So you don't want to overpromise. We don't want to lie to people. And we don't want to trick them into thinking it's like that there's wizards on the other end of the phone call that's going to wave a magic wand and they're suddenly not going to crave nicotine anymore. But it does work. And, you know, a lot of people's impression of the quit line was built those impressions were built when quit lines were fairly new, because that was a big deal when it happened. And so a lot of smokers and tobacco users today are 40, 50, 60 years old, and they very well remember being a 30 or a 20-year-old when the quit line was new to Colorado. And their impression of it's how good it is was built back before all of their coaches had received advanced training or in motivational interviewing and tobacco cessation coaching, before they had master's degrees, before the quit lines offered medications. So they weren't as effective back then. They really weren't. Back in the early 2000s, the success rates out of the quit line was about 12 to 15%, sometimes edging up into the 20% figure area, depending on, you know, where they were. That's pretty low. It's about what we'd expect out of say a cessation group or something like that. But they're doubly effective now, twice as effective as they were back then. We need to get that success story out there. Further on down the line, we have, that's exactly right. This is not your mother's quit line. They don't know about the quit line, and they worry about communicating with quit line staff due to language barriers. So here we just need to raise awareness. In the one case, we're raising awareness that the quit line exists. Your mileage may vary on how successfully current quit line communications have penetrated into your communities. The other one is about the fact that there is language support. Most of the quit lines now support Spanish language coaches online. The Asian American quit line speaks 4 or 5 languages: Cantonese, Mandarin, Korean, and one other. I think it's 4 languages that they speak at the Asian American quit line. If they are Asian, if they speak one of those Asian languages, they will just be transferred over to that Asian American quit line. when we think about the next two, we're getting pretty low on the list now. This combines into 24%. They don't think the quitline staff will understand their personal situations, and they don't trust the quitline. Here, we're not just communicating, we're not just raising awareness. We need to engage in trust building. And sometimes you're not the right person to do trust building. So find your local quitline callers, find your local community leaders, and get them out front saying the quitline can help you. They do understand you, right? And then finally, it's hard to do anything here from a public health perspective. The coaching calls won't fit their schedules. They don't have enough time to use the quitline. Time is just, nobody has enough of it. That's true. We can let them know that there are online options. There are chat functions. There are asynchronous options for them through the quitline that they might do instead. So these were the recommendations from the report. I'll lead it to you guys to read the report and to see these recommendations that we made to the quitline. But you'll see number 3 is embed the quitline in your health system. So when you're thinking about your health neighborhood work, one of the things that you can be doing as a health neighborhood-based initiative is just getting more people to make better quality quitline referrals. That's it. That's what we mean by that. Making sure that anybody who can make a quitline referral knows how to do it and ideally is doing it. I'll talk about the next, skipping on to 6, tailor quitline to the services of individuals. That's a recommendation that you guys can't do anything about. That's to and for the quitline, and they already do a lot of that. So that was a good one, and I'll talk about it in just a second. So I don't want to ignore it. And then finally, I do want to talk about leveraging existing technologies outside of telephones. We don't think of the telephone as new and existing technology anymore, even though on Lassie, it was still fairly new. If anybody watched the television show Lassie. Okay, what is a culturally tailored intervention? It's this. What we can be doing, since, like I said, making culturally tailored materials for the quitline is the quitline's business. But if you're making culturally tailored materials, this is what we're talking about. This is how to do it. You can also be tailoring your quitline education with these things in mind. So using local community leaders as guides and as creators. And then making sure that the messages that you have in there are reflective of the aspirational values of the communities that you're hoping to engage with. Now, when we're talking about rural, sort of full stop, that can mean sort of a blanket campaign that talks about rural values or talks about tobacco cessation in a rural way that, individuals made their choice, quote unquote, their choice to use tobacco based on like in a context of where their friends and family already used it, where it was seen as a rite of passage for growing up and becoming, a man or macho, and where the tobacco industry was spending millions and millions of dollars every single year to convince them that it was the right thing to do. And what all we're doing is providing a different set of options, right? We're just saying, you don't have to quit tobacco. But that's your choice, and so here's some evidence, here's some help for you. And also, we can talk about the way that their choices are limited by the fact that they are tobacco users, and how they open up a bigger. You don't want to use the word choice architecture, probably, because that's too stupid and academic. But we give them more options by helping them quit. Okay. Those kinds of things, but also thinking into yourself that, and those of you in rural communities don't need me to say this, but there are communities within rural communities, and they might have different or opposing values, and they might just talk about their values in slightly different ways. So everybody I know in the city and everybody I know in the country loves their families. Not everybody I know, but as a culture, we all say that we're family-based, but obviously maybe family needs to be more front and center in your messaging in rural areas than it does in the urban areas. And then finally, making sure that the people in the ads look and sound like the people that you're trying to persuade to either motivate to quit or to engage in these resources. And this really can't be underplayed. I absolutely love and support. Again, I get the question all the time: can you make a resource that looks like this? And yeah, I can, but the people in Durango don't talk like me, and doesn't matter how many statistics I know or what my GRE verbal score was. Like, that doesn't make what I would create better than what somebody locally would create, right? It's just the case that if people sound like you, you're more likely to trust them and believe them. So if you want good communications for this, I suggest reaching out to local communities to help you with that. I've already talked about recommendation 3, embedding it in the health neighborhood. I'm just going to go through and talk about our new technologies. And I'm going to really concentrate on the very last one here, but interactive voice response networks have been if you have access to something like this, or if you have partners that can do it, this is essentially where you get the automated calls. And the automated calls can say something like, if you've been struggling with tobacco use, did you know the quit line can help? Would you like me to connect you? And this has been particularly effective in rural communities and in African-American communities. And they've been, I say they've been, I don't know if they've been disproportionately impactful in those communities. We just know that they work in those communities to get people engaged, in that case, particularly in the quit line. And this is particularly good in getting people to re-engage in a previous quit attempt. Text-based and chat services, of course, are getting more and more popular, especially with our new AI tech. Web-based services and apps, I'm sort of going to lump together in just a second. ChatGPT is fantastic. I've had ChatGPT do all sorts of weird stuff here at BHWP, including passing our TTS exam. But you can actually engage with it. I had it say, pretend you're a tobacco cessation counselor and you're trying to get me to quit tobacco in the next week. And it engaged me in a conversation. Then I had to pretend like it was doing so as a character in a Shakespeare play. And then it did it that way, which was very fun and very weird. Wearable apps and wearable devices. This is a situation where we can be using this to augment their services. One of the things we talk about in tobacco cessation is giving people immediate feedback. Making sure they have immediate feedback that their quit is working, that is making them healthier. One of the way I like to point this out or talk about it is, in the early stages of a quit attempt, it can be fairly miserable, not just because of the withdrawal, which is certainly part of it, but the lungs are clearing, which it can be very uncomfortable. So they start coughing more as they're going through a quit attempt. Not everybody, but some people. They don't like that very much. And they also feel worse. But they're also more sensitive. Their aches and pains are amplified because tobacco actually dulls their sensitivity to aches and pains. So which is one of the reasons why we might see additional tobacco use in populations with chronic pain. They're actually self-treating with tobacco use, which is to say that, and this happens with opioid recovery too, the world hurts more, right? And so in a situation where suddenly things hurt more, you think that you are being damaged, right? So it's good. And then also I'll say olfactory and taste sensations. We normally talk about, you get your sense of smell back and your sense of taste back. And we think that is celebratory, but the world is also very stinky too. And so getting your sense of smell back is not necessarily an unmitigated benefit. And some food tastes bad. And also people aren't used to the power of the way their food tastes. They become accustomed to the way that the food is that they eat. And so to suddenly taste more is actually worse. Not to everybody, but this sort of overload of sensations can be very discomforting for a lot of people. So what do we do in the meantime? Say like, okay, I know that everything is uncomfortable, everything smells bad, you ache, right? You have headaches, on and on and on. Are you getting healthier? And we use spirometry to develop, to get a measure of lung age. We use the CO monitors to show that their body is clearing carbon monoxide faster. We can also do blood pressure to show them that their blood pressure is happening, because all those things happen while all those things improve, I should say, while they're going through the sort of misery of withdrawal and early recovery. Wearable devices is another thing where we can have them point to their average daily heart rate, their VO2 max. Depends on what their device is that they're wearing, but there might be some biometric indicators in there that would show improvement along with cessation, that we can have them looking at and tracking to keep themselves positive while these other things are going on. And then, so finally, I want to talk about apps. So the potential benefits of these things is that they can be used anywhere at any time. And in the case of something like a smartwatch or a Fitbit, they already have those things sometimes. Obviously, I know that we're not talking about, this is not equally applicable to necessarily all income levels or anything. It can be cost effective, right? So in some cases, like a Apple Watch is far less affordable than the free apps that are out there. So free is really affordable. A lot of these apps do have the ability for the people to type in their demographic information, including race and ethnicity, and especially age, and get tailored responses to them, or tailored messaging for them. And then different messages, some of you may know this, where you can actually say like, hey, I know I have trouble smoking when I'm out drinking with my friends. Every time I get near this address, give me a supportive message, and they can accommodate those sorts of things. A lot of them offer on-demand support. So when you're in the middle of a craving, something like that, be like, I need a supportive message right now. Boom, there's a coach, or there's an automated replying system. And of course, some of them also offer networks or forums where people can engage with other quitters. And I would say that, like in this case, like you can't. Reddit is weird. If you haven't been on Reddit, it's very, very weird. But they're a very supportive community for quitters. They offer a lot of weird advice sometimes, but you know, as long as weird advice doesn't hurt you, I don't care if it's out there. So with all the potential benefits, there are some potential downfalls. And that is, of course, that they're just wrong about stuff. And I'm a person that likes to be right. And so this is particularly bothersome to me. Ergo, top bullet point. But maybe some of these other things would be more important to them. Like I don't like when they're claiming to be therapeutic, but they don't have any evidence that they've actually built their platform on any of the evidence-based modalities, which are right now just CBT and MI, to a lesser extent mindfulness, and emerging DBT. I haven't seen any DBT, dialectical behavioral therapy apps, but I suspect that at some point they'll be coming out. So those are our 4 modalities that I would say would be somewhat evidence-based, CBT and MI being the 2 that literally have an actual strong evidence base. People may be more concerned, individuals that you talk to may be more concerned with them not being particularly secure, losing their private data. Tobacco cessation data is health data. It should be protected. It should always fall under HIPAA level protections. And that goes down to the next one, where not only are they potentially having unsecure, I don't know which ones I didn't say, HIPAA. Which acronyms did I say? CBT is cognitive behavioral therapy. MI is motivational interviewing. DBT is dialectical behavioral therapy. So the CBT and MI are the 2 that have an official evidence base that the CDC says these are good modalities for tobacco cessation. I personally think that mindfulness has enough evidence to support its use. The problem is that mindfulness isn't a pure modality. It doesn't have like enough structure for the CDC to just recommend mindfulness, because you can do a lot of stuff in mindfulness. And DBT is, I think those of us in this world have suspected for a very long time that dialectical behavioral therapy would not only be good for tobacco use, but it would be particularly good for tobacco use in adolescent populations, because substance use and adolescence is like where DBT is most frequently used now. And there's, as of the last Surgeon General's report, there's been 2 official studies that have been recognized as supporting DBT, which is just not enough for them to say yet that they want to recommend it, full stop. Yeah, so not only is their data potentially not secure, but maybe they're actually actively selling it, which would be a problem. If they're not collecting clinically useful or actionable data. So while there's literally like tens of thousands of tobacco cessation apps that are out there, it seems to me when I review them that a lot of them look like they were class projects. So they're real static. They ask some really basic questions. They provide some really basic like tools, like a cigarette smoking daily tracker, that kind of thing. But they're not really engaging with that person, and they're not engaging with that individual at all. They're not using feedback from the person to adapt what they're sending back out. And just know that this is not we haven't really studied it very much. So individual apps are often studied, but they're studied by the app manufacturers. And so they're going to be a little bit more biased to showcase any study that they make that any study that they conduct that shows that their app was successful. So that, which leads me here. I'm not going to make any recommendations of any specific apps necessarily. if you have some questions about specific ones, I'll either say I don't know that one, or yeah, probably that one's probably pretty good. But this is a framework for how you might think about reviewing apps on your own. So this paper down here that I've cited, if you want it, let me know. This is how the APA, the American Psychological Association, recommends reviewing mental health apps. And I think tobacco cessation is either in that substance abuse space or in that mental health space. There's no substance use app framework that I'm aware of. So this is how the APA is looking at their mental health apps. And they're looking at level 1, just who can use it, how much does it cost, does it have anything that's indicating that there's something that we should be looking at with a jaundiced eye? And stability is really like, how long has that app existed? Is it going to disappear tomorrow? Is it going to disappear before people are, halfway through their quit attempt with that app? If it's been around for a while, that is a sign that it will continue to be around for a little while longer. So the next is that level of privacy and data collection and storage stuff. So always go in there and look. If you're thinking about recommending apps to people, these are the things you would look at, like is it free? And then next up is the patient's data protected? What data does it ask? This is a situation where you would actually literally like sign up for these apps to get a look at some of the stuff. What is it asking, and is that stuff safe? Is it being protected? The next stuff, now, this clinical foundation, this was a recommendation for psychologists, but the things that I would look for, if I'm training you how to look at apps for someone else, I don't expect you to tell me your clinical first impressions, but I do want you to look for, does it say that it's based in CBT? Does it say that it's based in motivational interviewing? Does it say that it's based in some other therapeutic modality? And if it does, and you're not aware, if it's not CBT or MI, and if you want to write me an email saying, hey, I just found an app that uses blankety blank, is that a strong enough therapeutic base? I will tell you yes or no. Most of them that I've run across don't mention a therapeutic foundation at all. And then after that, it's really CBT. That's the two. It's like nothing and CBT. And so the next one is what kind of engagement can people accept, and is it ADA, Americans with Disability Act compliant? Does the app use colorblind sensitive color palettes? Does it have text and sound? Does it have captioning? So, does it have the capacity to make the print really big? Those sorts of things that might make it inaccessible to some people. What's the literacy level? So if you're going to be recommending this to high school kids, can they read it and understand it? If you're going to read it, does it have language accessibility? So if you're going out into you're making a partnership with your Korean Christian church, does it have Korean applicability? Right. So the really basic level stuff to finer and more finely tuned audiences. And then finally, what does the data look like? And data ownership really is like, can they download it? Can they and like analyze it on their own, or is all that stuff stay proprietary? And don't worry about clinically actionable and therapeutic alliance unless you have a specific question about those particular things. That's really where the person can use the data in their sessions with a one-on-one counselor is what that means. Michelle.
Yeah, hi, this is really interesting. It reminds me of a webinar I listened to about mental health apps, and maybe they were referencing the same study. So it's fascinating. I'd like to know this stuff, but I'd also like to know when somebody calls you and asks, "Is this a good app?" And I'd love to see your response to them. Is there any way to capture that in a Google Doc? We're not asking you to recommend things, but to capture your conversations with others about these apps to give us more insight so that we don't all have to, delve into the research.
Yeah, for sure. So I don't recommend, one of the reasons I don't make app recommendations specifically myself is because, first of all, I cannot keep up with all of them. There are tens and thousands of them, and they change all the time. They change somewhere else on this computer over here. I have a list of the ones that I researched and enjoyed, like I want to say 18 months ago. And I hope that most of them are still on there. but I don't know for sure. So it's hard for me to just come out and be like, oh, you should check out this one, because if I send somebody out and that app doesn't exist anymore, then I look bad and I frustrated them, right? So that's part of it. So if somebody comes to me with an app and it's an app I don't recognize, then I will do something like this evaluation screener that I just put up on the screen. Just very quickly kind of go through it and say like, okay, it hits all the high points, right? One thing I always like to point out is, unless an app is actively harmful in some way, if it frustrates somebody, if it makes their quit attempt so miserable that it delays their next attempt, then that app is out of the question. I'm not going to go for it. But the power of the placebo, the power of confidence going into a quit attempt, it cannot be understated. And so if somebody thinks it will help them, then it probably does. So Jennifer Schwartz has said in the chat, for those of you who can't see it, that STEPP will follow up regarding programmatic guidance on apps. And then I also recommend, obviously, I'm biased. This is a report that we put together and we just put on our website, like, I want to say like 2 months ago. This is our distillation of those last couple slides. This is how we would be using this is our mobile evaluation toolkit. So, and so I don't want to contradict anything that STEPP would say, because most apps have not been clinically verified. First of all, apps in general haven't been clinically verified, but self-help materials have. And so I would be looking for, is this like a nice compact way to provide some of those self-help materials that you might otherwise hand out? Does this have good guidance on education about the harms of use? Does it have good guidance on the benefits of quitting? Does it guide people to a pharmacotherapy recommendation? Does it educate them around the nature of the pharmacotherapy that they have access to? Does it tell them how they might get access to those things? And then I would look at all those sort of those more clinical type things, like, does it help them identify triggers? Does it help them identify barriers to care? Does it help them come up with strategies to overcome those barriers? Does it have craving support? And if it has all those things, then it's just a matter of how good are they at it. And that's just going to be harder to determine. And that's where staying, if you're in a treatment situation, this becomes a lot easier. Because you can just ask them, like, did you play with the app this week? Did you use it? How did you use it? What did you like about it? And then start to collect those stories. And then over time, if an app sticks around, you can start to say to people like, oh yeah, I've recommended this app to so-and-so, and this is what they said back. And so they'll say like, oh, I've tried other apps and this part of it didn't work. You're like, oh, well, if you didn't like that part, then maybe you can try one that doesn't do that. Jennifer, are you? I'm done with my comments for today. Do you have things that you can share now, or would you just prefer to send an email out later?
Hi, Jim. Are you talking to me, Jennifer Schwartz?
Oh yes, yes, Jennifer Schwartz, who said that STEPP would follow up about programmatic guidance.
Yes. Thank you for asking. I'm actually chatting with the team right now. I did a quick search on the Grantee Site of tobacco-free CO, and I'm not pulling up our guidance there easily. So we'll follow up with everybody in an email. And I really appreciate all these great questions and the conversations that's been happening today.
Awesome.
Thank you so much, Jim.
Yeah.
Thanks, everyone. And
so we have a few more minutes. If there are, do you know of any orgs running CBT or DBT support groups, either online or in person? I don't have them memorized, but I can say that you can go to findtreatment.gov and then /locator. And you can type in your zip code, your city, your county, or your state, if you care about the statewide level. And that gives you a list of all of the mental health and or substance abuse providers in your area. You can select one or both of those options. And if you are, the slash goes the other way and only one dot between find treatment and gov, but yes. And so anyway, you can look at which of those organizations have a tobacco-free policy, which of them like an on-site campus policy, which of them are offering treatment. Sometimes they'll talk about which kinds of treatment they provide, whether it's group or individual, and they'll mention modalities. Sometimes it's not. I'm sorry. Let me restate that. They will say if they're offering tobacco cessation counseling, and then in a separate section they will list if they are which modalities they are sort of experts in, trauma informed and CBT and DBT and all these other things. That does not necessarily mean that they offer CBT tobacco cessation counseling. Typically, the same counselors that are able to offer CBT here and who are providing tobacco cessation counseling here are doing CBT as tobacco cessation counseling, if they're doing tobacco cessation counseling at all, right? Because that's the modalities they're trained in, so that's how they provide support. You can't guarantee that, but it will. It's a clue. And then they also mention if they are providing medications and which ones. If they do nicotine replacement therapy or if they do the non-nicotine replacement therapies as well. I do caution that database is subject to the individual organization's willingness to answer the SAMHSA survey when it comes out. And it is an exhausting and long survey. And so not all the responses are always accurate, but it gives you a starting spot to figure out what's going on. And what I would do is like kind of get that list. Hopefully there's only 4 or 5 of those organizations in the area that you're concentrating on, and just call them and find out what they're doing. Let them know you're from local public health and that you're hoping to make recommendations, referrals into their services. You just need to have a better sense of what's going on. And normally in those situations, especially if you go by email, you will get a response, although you might have to be persistent, because my experience with local mental health is that they are slow to answer questions, but they will eventually do it. They don't hate you. They're just busy. Other questions?
Jem, I think the only question I have, it goes back to this Zen product, which I know like is getting news coverage right now. I think that for maybe not today, but I've had adults say to me like, well, I can't find anything that's like harmful about it, and it's better than using, chewing tobacco, and so I'm going to use it. And it's like the only real comeback I can come up with is like, well, it's like we don't want youth using it, and I just don't know if I should even be trying to debate with an adult about that, because it's like, really, how is it different from nicotine patches, and how is it different from nicotine gum if it's keeping them from using some other more harmful type of tobacco? So
yeah, so there's been, to my knowledge, there has been no specific studies on the nicotine pouches, full stop. And of course, I know for a fact there's been none on their long-term use. We know that nicotine is not entirely safe, even for adults. Now, the level and types of harm, I'd be very careful here, but if the entire world gave up cigarettes tomorrow and they all moved to Zen and nobody new moved to Zen, we're going to be better off. There's no question in my mind. So a little bit of speculation there, just because most of the harms that we associate with tobacco use are derived from exposure to the byproducts of combustion, and Zen has no exposure to combustion at all. It's just nicotine. That being said, as you already pointed out, nicotine is harmful for anybody below the age of, say, 24, 25, full stop. It disrupts the normal natural progression of the development of the brain, and we don't know what that looks like, right? And so anybody below, because I say 24, 25, so extending it well beyond what our federal regulations are in terms of purchasing, right? So even in those 3 or 4 years after 21, I'd still say no nicotine. And it's not entirely harmless for adults after that. It is associated with the progression of type 2 diabetes and may in fact cause it. It is associated with the progression of cancers. It does not, right now, nicotine is not linked to, or not causally linked to, the development of cancer, but should you get a cancer and you are regularly taking nicotine, it's going to make that disease progress faster. And of course, survivability of cancer is determined largely on when you can detect it and at what stage. So even in those even in those situations, diabetes is a what, not top 4 or 5 level killer. And that's getting worse all the time, or can. I mean, it's gone up and down, but it's bad. It's killing quite a bit of people, and we're still not fully confident that sole nicotine use, just using nicotine, isn't associated with cardiovascular issues. All the evidence suggests that it should be, Now, we do have some long-term nicotine replacement therapy users that have not seen an increase in cardiovascular risk or stroke risk. But it does excite the cardiovascular system. It causes higher blood pressure. It causes a lot of the things that are associated with the development of things like heart disease further down the line. And maybe it is or maybe nicotine would be if we had longer life expectancies. So that part I don't know. So in general, for adults, I think it's hard to engage with them. Like, I don't want them smoking for sure. I just don't. I also don't want them dependent on any substances, but that's a particular preference of mine. It may be a particular preference of you. It may be a particular preference of your local public health agency. I gave up caffeine, but I'm not working in caffeine control, right? So I think that dependence on any substance lowers people's quality of life. It restricts their choices. I think it's an overall bad thing. That said, I'd like them to live longer with fewer choices than to die 15 to 20 years before they're supposed to. Yeah, Jennifer.
Hi, I'm just chatting with the cessation pillar right now, and I wanted to just give a quick update to everyone. So the best advice or guidance I can give right now is really to not recommend cessation apps. We really want to drive folks to the quit line, of course, and My Life, My Quit, even though we recognize they both don't have a standalone app. In the past, STEPP actually did a lot of work to begin a contract to create a cessation app specifically for Colorado. For a number of reasons that was not able to launch and be successful. The cessation pillar has looked into, at different points, could we potentially track a few cessation apps? And honestly, the amount of apps that are out there, it would be impossible to really track and then investigate them thoroughly enough that STEPP could formally recommend them. So if there is something in particular, a particular app or anything that's going on locally or that you're becoming aware of in your community and you have a question, please just reach out to your STEPP project officer. They'll connect you also with the cessation pillar to talk more. I hope this was a helpful update. Let me know if you have any other questions.
It is, Jennifer. And it offers me a good opportunity to clarify about like why I wanted to talk about this. I'm not out here, I'm specifically not recommending any apps for exactly that reason, right? This is more like, what do you say when somebody comes to you and says, I'm using this app, right? Can you help them say like, okay, look for these downfalls, blah, 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 blah. Exactly.
Thank you so much.
No, thank you. All right, guys and girls, ladies and gentlemen, caballos y damas, we are caballeros y damas, lo siento. We are at time. I appreciate all of your attention and for joining. And I'll send another email out as soon as we get the Quitline outcomes report date rescheduled.
Thanks, Jem.
Thank you.
Thank you.